On to Mars or on to a huge space station orbiting perhaps 115, 120 miles above the Earth. What does the future hold in space? The National Administration on Space plans more missions to the moon, of course. That really would be a foolhardy thing to turn back now. There are a lot more trips will be needed to really exploit what we have done in this great exploration of today, in this flight of discovery. It won't cost as much on a comparative basis. The machinery has all been made now, but we will be sending more men up to move out from their spacecraft further than these men dare go on this first mission later tonight, and also eventually perhaps if they go through the full 9 further Apollo missions that are on the drawing boards and get the money for that, even in vehicles go out for long-ranging exploration of much greater duration on the moon's surface. But then what beyond that? The space station, on to Mars? Well, a man who has dreamed of these things, who has written many novels about them, who has written a movie, 2001, about this thing, sits with me here, Arthur Clarke, one of my very favorite people, who has been with us at CBS for several of these missions now. And Arthur, what do you think we ought to do next? I mean, what would you like to see? The space station or Mars, or perhaps both? Well, I guess you'd like to see both. We all like to see all we can do, but given some national priority problem.
We will see both. I think the first order priority is the establishment of an economical space transporter so that we can establish a large space station which would act as an astronomical observatory, which will tell us a very great deal about Mars and the other planets before we get there, because then with large telescopes in space near the Earth, we'll learn a great deal about these places. And also, from the space station, in the space station, we can develop the techniques of long-range space exploration.
Arthur, you've been dreaming of this moment long before many of us did. Beginning back in the mid-1930s, you were writing about going out to the moon. What was your feeling when we saw this thing happen today?
Well, I don't think I did feel anything. I think we all sort of, time just stopped for me, and I think it stopped for everybody. It was just a hole in history, you know, and the whole world's, everything, my heart stopped, breathing stopped.
Mine certainly did. I think all of ours did. I think you're absolutely right. I can't imagine a moment to equal this. The only thing I could imagine is if some fellow came forward and could say positively we're not going to have any more war.
I think this is a step in that direction, because this sort of thing is making our stupidities here on Earth seem more and more intolerable. And I think this may be the greatest result of the space program.
Speaking of national rivalries, do you have any thoughts about what the Russians may be doing now that we know that their unmanned Luna 15 is in an orbit very similar to ours around the equator of the moon?
My theory is that it's going to land with a bottle of vodka.
A congratulatory bottle of vodka? Or a ceremonial bottle? Well, thank you, Arthur Clarke. Bill Stout's at North American Aviation out in Downey, California, North American Rockwell it's called now, with Robert Heinlein, another eminent science fiction writer. And we want to keep you here, Arthur, because you two fellows may have something to chat about. And let's bring them in. Bill Stout and Robert Heinlein.
You know, Walter, in thinking back to what these men have written about and done so many years before the landing of Apollo 11, I think it's worth recalling that Mr. Heinlein's book, Rocket Ship Galileo, was written in the 40s. And the film, Destination Moon, 1950,
that's right.
That's a long time ago to talk about a landing and a return.
It's been thought about for, well, the first novel written about a trip to the moon was not written by me. It was written by Cyrano de Bergerac a long, long time ago.
Nonetheless, you were far ahead, and you were talking in your book about nuclear power as the means of getting there.
Yes, nuclear power. We will be using nuclear power in spaceships. This is a certainty. We're going to go on bigger, farther. I agree with what Arthur said a while ago about the possible effect on war on this planet, but I think this whole business today, this week, has been thought of in many cases in too small terms. This is the greatest event in all the history of the human race up to this time. Today is New Year's Day of the year one. If we don't change the calendar, historians will do so. The human race, this is our change, our puberty rites, bar mitzvah, confirmation, from the change from infancy into adulthood for the human race. And we are going to go on out not only to the moon, to the stars, we're going to spread. I don't know that the United States is going to do it. I hope so. I'm an American myself. I want it to be done by us. But in any case, the human race is going to do it. It's utterly inevitable. We're going to spread through the entire universe.
It's a grand painting, Mr. Heinlein, with very broad strokes indeed. Do you think that perhaps the hostilities that still exist on Earth, I think of the Chinese rather than the Soviets at this point, since we seem to be in friendly terms circling the moon, do you think these hostilities could head us off before we begin to realize what you think we should?
I think that this is the most hopeful thing that has happened to us, in that we are now going out as far as the moon. I don't know whether we're going to get rid of war and hostility. I'm not at all sure of that, but I do know that your grandchildren, the descendants of all of us, will be in colonies elsewhere. The human race will not die. Even if we spoil this planet, the human race will not die. It's going to go on and on and on. And this is, Confucius, I think it was, said, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. Today we have made the one step. We're about to make that one step from at Tranquility Base in a matter of minutes now.
Yes, certainly what we've all been waiting for. Walter, do you think that Mr. Heinlein is perhaps a bit too bold in his predictions?
I wouldn't think so, and I'm sure Arthur Clarke, sitting here alongside me, doesn't think so. We've got earthbound constraints to exploration, but it's as inevitable now as the tides themselves that are controlled by that moon on which men landed today. You can't stop progress, and this is progress. This is where men go. We know we can't. If we could, we'd probably stop some of the highways built through the middle of our forests and our cities. We'd stop a lot of other things, but it can't be done. And this promises benefits which you can't even imagine today. I doubt, Arthur, that you and Robert Heinlein out there in California, the two of you, could possibly sit together and with all of your great imaginative capabilities, put together a list of all of the benefits to be derived by mankind, or even a small portion of them, from this great feat today.
This is true, and we often use this parallel of coming out of the sea onto land, and I'd like to take it further. You know, in the sea, we could not develop civilization for a simple reason. In the ocean, you cannot have fire, and fire is the key to all our civilization, all our technology. I believe in the same way, when we get beyond the atmosphere, out into the new environment of space, we will find new powers, new capabilities, as much beyond fire as that was beyond anything that could be done in the sea.
We're going to have to find something as a substitute for fire, aren't we? You can't have a fire out there anymore, and you can have it in the sea.
Well, you can have fire. You can have chemical reactions, of course. After all, that's what how our rockets work. But we'll have other things. I think in space we may discover the way of controlling gravity. I don't think we've had any chance of learning much about gravity here on the Earth, because we're in it all the time, you see. But when we get out in space, effectively beyond the pull of gravity, we'll be able to study it and perhaps learn how to control it, and that will be a tremendous breakthrough.
Do you two fellows know each other, Arthur Clarke
Oh, yes.
and Robert Heinlein?
I stayed with Bob back in 1952 when he was living in Colorado Springs.
I was wondering if I was going to have to introduce you by
no.
long-distance television here. You don't seem to say hello to each other even.
No, Arthur and I have known each other for 20 years now,
Yes.
I think. I've visited his home in Ceylon. He's visited the home that I had at that time in Colorado. And I don't think we are in any disagreement on any point about any of this.
No.
I find that the only thing that troubles me about this is that people talk about other things and don't realize how big a day this is. This is the biggest day the human race has ever seen. This is the most important day in history. This is the most important thing since the human race learned to talk.
Mr. Heinlein, I think it's very possible that Derek Severide, as he is wont to do, and almost every time he opens his mouth, put his finger right on it again. We just can't concentrate on a little tiny spot very long without our minds wandering off. And as great as this day is, the peripheral things kind of impinge. Maybe it's our escape valve in some way. I just wonder, when you two get together at Arthur's home in Ceylon or your home, Mr. Heinlein, you must talk over ideas and things, but do you have to kind of hold back from some of those most imaginative ideas for fear the other guy will go off and write about it?
I think we both have enough ideas to keep us equally busy for the rest of our lives.
I think that's highly probable, highly probable. Thank you very much, Bill Stout, and Mr. Heinlein, Albert Heinlein, another eminent science fiction writer from California, and Arthur Clarke, you in New York, and we'll be coming back to you, of course, from time to time as this great day continues to unfold. And now we know that the hatch is due to be open in 59 minutes from now. Mission Control, just a moment ago, told Mike Collins in the orbiting command module, Columbia, that the hatch opening would occur about 9:32 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Now, they were giving him the same read-up figures that we had if they took the full hour and 55 minutes of the flight plan for EVA preparation. We're assuming, however, that they have decided that they will stick pretty close to that time, and that's will come 9:32 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, unless they change it again. CBS News color coverage of the epic journey of Apollo 11 will continue in a moment. Well, for thousands of years now, it's been man's dream to walk on the moon. Right now, after seeing it happen, knowing that it happened, it still seems like a dream. And it is, I guess, a dream come true. Even the television pictures we saw had a kind of a dream-like quality about them. Those two ghostly figures in black and white, shades of gray in there a little bit against that black background of space, lighted by the highlights of the sun, unimpeded by the atmosphere, bouncing against the lunar module's landing strut. These men walking and loping and lumbering and leaping, almost drifting across that rock-strewn landscape. And those eerie pictures transmitted across 250,000 miles, just think of it. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were just as we all imagined the first moon explorers might be. I think, Arthur Clarke, they were efficient, they were cooperative, they were calm, you might say they were cheery, they certainly seemed to be, even lighthearted at times, and above all, they were humble. They made all of us, I'm sure, feel proud, hopeful, and humble in our own ways. As Neil Armstrong said, the first words as man stepped foot on the moon: a small step for man, a giant leap for mankind. Now, that was the way Armstrong described his first step, the first step onto lunar soil. A day that can never come again, a day that shall forever live in history, as will those words, which will be memorized by schoolboys half a century and more from now. That, too, seemed like just the right thing for the first moon explorer to say. And, you know, one of the things that impressed me about those kind of ghost-like pictures, imperfect pictures they were, Arthur, is that they reminded me of some of the very earliest science fiction pictures of men landing on the moon. They almost looked like they were taken right out of that old footage. Everything that's happened was just as you guys who wrote about this long before we even knew how we were going to get there, visualized it.
Yes, I sometimes feel that I'm going to wake up and find that I'm sleeping on my typewriter, you know, and it's all a dream.
Well, it is incredible, isn't it, that it's come out this way, and it's come out so much sooner than anybody thought it would.
Yes, and there's a feeling that this is where we belong. I have, you know, when you see the way they adapted. I'm reminded of my first underwater experience. You know, when you go in, when you dive first, you're scared, you're nervous, you don't know what's going to be like, but very quickly you feel absolutely at home, and we're going to be the same on the moon and planets.
Would you think, Arthur, that this experience that we've seen today, even though we don't have the scientific data back, but we've seen it. We know the readouts, the biomedical readouts, that their heart rates were not bad. They went up a little bit toward the end as they were exerting themselves.
Not as much as ours did.
No, undoubtedly. Their respiration was good. They didn't overheat in the spacesuits. They worked fine. In fact, they were cool in the shadows of the spacecraft, they said. Would this indicate to you that maybe we civilians might get out there to the moon a little bit earlier than we had dreamed up to a few hours ago?
Oh, we'll be going there, certainly. But, of course, the procedures have to be simplified rather drastically before the ordinary, untrained person can make this trip. I mean, putting in all that equipment and taking it off again, that's a terrible drag.
But with all those moon hostesses to help you...
Well, if they're there to help you, fine.
Bill Stout and Robert Heinlein are again with us, Arthur, out at North American Rockwell in Downey, California. And by this miracle of television, we can bring you two distinguished science fiction writers together again. Come in, Bill and Mr. Heinlein.
Art, you said that you felt that we would be going there fairly soon, and I think it may possibly be quite soon. I am starting to save money for a ticket now, having been born a generation too late. I don't know. Perhaps you worked out an angle to get there without buying a ticket. I'll have to look into this. But one question which has been asked me repeatedly in the course of the evening is, was I surprised by anything we saw today? And I could not truthfully answer that I was surprised at any of it. Delighted, utterly delighted, completely euphoric, happiest day in my life. But surprised, no. Did you find anything in it, Arthur, that surprised you?
No, I feel exactly the same way, Bob. And incidentally, you know that we have a situation arising now which is exactly the same as your movie Destination Moon ended 20 years ago, where they lightened the ship by throwing out the surplus weight. And this is just how that movie ended in 1950, and just what's happening going to happen now in about 1 hour from... This is where we came in.
I want to know how you fellows, Robert Heinlein out there and Arthur Clarke here in New York, knew in 1950 how this was going to work when the scientists didn't know that that was the way it was going to work yet. It was another 11 years before we even began the design.
Slight correction, Walter. Arthur is a scientist. I'm an engineer myself, but no scientist. But Arthur's qualifications on this are quite as good as anyone who was in the project.
Well, I'm sure we'd all agree with that, but I was thinking of those in the project who had to design something that would work, and they had quite a few years. You had quite a few years on them, Arthur, in writing how it was going to work. So did you, Mr. Heinlein.
Walter, if the public has not been told about it tonight, you should tell them about Arthur's prediction on the communication satellites. I don't know whether this has been mentioned or not, but Arthur was certainly the first man to propose what we now refer to just commonly as ComSat. Arthur, how long back was it? What was the date of your original article, and where was it published, proposing communication satellites and telling how it could be done?
Well, this was in 1945 in a British radio journal called Wireless World. But I think we...
Tell them how much money you made out of it, too.
$50, which I thought was quite fair pay for the time. But, you know, I think, Bob, we science fiction writers have brainwashed the engineers, so they may be doing things now, copying our stories, which is why it looks familiar, but they may not be doing it the right way. We may have given them wrong directions, and there may be better ways of doing some of the things that we've said.
I'm not at all sure how things are going to be done. I'm simply certain that they're going to be done in a big way, that we're going out to all of the planets, we're going out to the stars, we're going out indefinitely. There's one equation that everybody knows, E equals mc squared, that proves the potentiality whereby man can live anywhere where there is mass. He doesn't have to have any other requirement but mass with the technology that we now have, and this human race will do so. I would like to see it continue to be pushed by the United States, but it doesn't matter whether they're yellow, brown, black, green, Chinese, Russians, Americans, or what. It's the human race, and they're going there, and nothing can stop it now.
You know, and when they do go out there, just as when they came to this country, they forgot their original nationalities. We're going to see, going out into space, new, let's say, nations or who will develop new ideas, and we're going to see the same cycle that began in this country 300-400 years ago, continuing on a greater scale out in space. And at the same time, as far as this country is concerned, I do hope that this great lifting of the spirit, which we've all experienced today, will mark a change in morale and perhaps help this country get away from the defeatism of the past.
I do hope so. I do hope so. There have been too many of the young people in this country with a defeatist attitude toward things, and I hope that this one will give them the lift, the esprit de corps, the élan vital, to realize how terribly important this is, not to them alone, but to their children, their grandchildren, for thousands and thousands of years. This is it. This is the great day.
How could one turn off of a world like this? How could one turn off of a nation? How could one turn off of a people who are capable of doing what we have done today, we, mankind, have done today, and we, the United States, have done today? Building on technology contributed by all nations and all peoples, from the very first astronomers and the very first physicists and chemists, right on through to the culminating event that we have watched on this particular day. How could anyone turn off of all that? We can understand the need for priorities, with limited budgets and all that sort of thing. Certainly poverty must be taken care of. Certainly pollution control must get a very high priority. Certainly we must do something about urban decay and about improved transportation here on Earth, even as we consider going to Mars and beyond. But that, I think, is the key word, even as we consider these other things. It is a morale booster, Arthur, and I can't believe that there are very many who really in their hearts didn't get a thrill out of it today. They may speak the cold words that they have learned to believe are smart, are intellectual, are faddist, and that's really all they are. But in their hearts they had to feel it.
You know, another historical parallel, Sputnik has often been compared to Pearl Harbor, and that parallel is pretty good, because remember how Pearl Harbor turned out in the long run.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to think that Sputnik was 1957, that was just 12 years ago. Gagarin's flight, 1961, just 8 years ago. Those events are taken as a major defeat. Certainly here at home, we were crushed by them, but we were inspired to move ahead. And with the inspired leadership of that particular era in the White House, we did move ahead, and in 8 short years, to this magnificent feat of today. And while we have talked of a space race during these years, we must conclude that today was a great victory in that race for the United States and for the Western democracies, though, of course, we applaud also still today the great pioneering ventures of the Soviet Union in space.
Walter,
yes.
Arthur, in one of his stories, pointed out that a legless man could be an astronaut. I want to point out that it doesn't have to be a man at all. And for esprit and for the continuation of the human race, it is time for us, as quickly as possible, to get the other half of the human race in on this. It does not take a man to run a spaceship. It can be done just as well by a woman as it can be done by a man. And we could even have saved, well, Arthur, perhaps you'll make a quick guess at it on based on model theory.
You saved a couple hundred pounds weight.
Yes, the payload for this ship was 3 big men. Suppose we made it 95-pound women. Let's take Miss Peggy Fleming as an example of the sort of woman who would have the health and the reflexes and the intelligence and the ability to withstand free fall and to get along on her feet, dancing the way we saw our 3 heroes dancing today. The next how much would we have saved? We probably could clean up pollution in the whole country just on the amount we saved by using women instead of men on the next one.
Except that I can never imagine a crew of 3 female astronauts. It'd have to be
I want to make them mixed.
Can you
For one
imagine
thing,
making the decision which two are going to go
Well,
down to the moon's surface?
I want to make them mixed because in the long run, it's not just men who are going out, it's the human race, men, women, and children who are going out. And some of the trips are going to be very long, and it's going to be a way of life rather than just a trip. But this has not scared human beings in the past. Most recently, the thing that put Boston on the map was the China Clipper, which took as much as 3 years for a voyage. And yet they made money on it. No radio, no reports, no nothing. They regularly expected the ship to go away, be gone at least 3 years, and perhaps not come back. And yet it was done over and over and over again. If they could brave the Cape storms, I'm sure that the human race can brave whatever the solar system has to face us, and also on out to the stars. We're going to be at Proxima Centauri before you know it.
And to underline your point, those clipper captains began taking their families along with them.
Yes, indeed.
On those long voyages. And I heartily endorse, if my endorsement means anything to anybody other than Mrs. Cronkite, the ladies going out there say are qualified. There's some magnificent women pilots who could qualify as astronauts tomorrow.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't think of any greater inducement to going out in space than having women go out there, too. In fact, it won't be worthwhile to go out there unless there are some out there.
Do you realize the first baby is probably going to be born off the Earth before the end of this century?
I feel sure you're right, Arthur.
There's a situation to contemplate.
I'm sure it's true.
In Kraft Ericke Space Hospital, perhaps.
Very probably, yes.
In a weightless
Oh, yes.
environment.
Certainly before the end of the century, we will have hospitals on the moon for elderly people to enable them to live quite a lot longer because of their tired hearts under 1/6 gravity and their fragile bones and so forth.
If we, I don't think we should leave the subject of women astronauts before citing the NASA line on why there aren't any yet for the multi-man spaceships, and that's because of the intimacy of the long voyage out to the moon. It might be a trifle embarrassing to mix the sexes. It was considered until a little more privacy can be achieved for each of the participants in that flight. But the next size space. Beg your pardon?
The Russians didn't worry about it.
They haven't sent a lady astronaut up along with the male astronaut. Valentina
I'm sorry.
Tereshkova went alone, and
His and hers.
yes, you need his and hers capsules. And but I would not doubt, and I think that I think this, if I may add it, that the next size spacecraft will do the job, and it will be possible then. The next size spacecraft with, quite honestly, putting it bluntly, private sanitary facilities aboard, and that's what's required. Thank you very much, Robert Heinlein, out there at Downey, California. You've been a great addition to our programming today, and we're so pleased that you could be with Bill Stout out there at Downey. And Arthur
Thank you,
Clark,
Walter.
of course, we're so glad to have had you aboard here again. And we'll
Good night,
look forward
Bob.
to other spots with both of you in the coming days. CBS News color coverage of the epic journey of Apollo 11.